Hi, my name is Jason Murphy. I spent 26 plus years working at Big Pharma as a scientist and engineer, and did a lot of IT, did a lot of science stuff. Then COVID hits, so I was unemployed for a year. I took my PowerShell and my SQL skills and got Power BI and got into the Power Platform. And after about a year, ended up at the University of Surrey doing Power Platform development. And that's where this journey started. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about the real world example for today, which was to take an existing paper-based process turned into a modular system with SharePoint. All right, it was an existing paper-based system. It had 5 submissions per run. You had a start, end, hourly bill rates, the amount expected, not calculated. And so we did what absolutely everybody else did in the world. We built a basic system around Microsoft Forms with data validation, with no data validation, because it was a Microsoft Basic Form and SharePoint. Our flow took it to SharePoint, put the data in, then it tried to check the data validity, then it sent it out for approval. So like everybody else, we ended up with an inverted tree of life where one flow did everything and we ran into a big bunch of problems. So for anyone not familiar with this, a Power Automate flow can be as simple as the left-hand side. There's a manual trigger, there's a compose box, and there's hello world. That's a flow. Or, like everybody else does, you end up with something as complicated as an inverted tree of life. And that's what everybody writes, because that's the way the world is based. I want one thing to get from the top to the bottom and come up with a solution. So what we ended up doing at this point was finding out we ran into a bunch of problems. It was messy. There was a lot of nested towers. We had to fix a lot of bad data, and we had to restart things. And restarting's your big problem, because to restart the run, you have to have permissions to get to environment, to get to the flow, to get to the SharePoint list. You got to find the row that was broken. You got to try restarting it without breaking anything else. That's a big problem. The back-end people who we built it for wouldn't go near these things at all. It was far too complicated. And then obviously you'd also run into licensing issues, okay? So those were all the big problems we had with our inverted tree of life, and they were standard. So as everybody sees from my profile picture on LinkedIn, I'm a bit of a shark fan. And so our basic solution, everybody went, well, you're going to need a bigger flow. No, we're not. We're actually going to need more than one flow. And every flow should do one thing, or a distinct set of things. Every flow should have a start condition. Every flow should have an end condition that we know about, which we'll use called management columns. And then where there's multiple actions inside of a flow, we then look to use child flows for the repeat things over time. But the most important thing about all of this is that you plan for it to go wrong. Guaranteed it's going to go wrong somewhere. And as long as you're planning for it, you can fix it. All right, fixing bad data and restarting it now can all be done from a fun, friendly, colored SharePoint list. All right, so this is where I'm going to show the process. So we have multiple flows in our big solution. Okay, the first flow just takes the data from the basic form, Microsoft Basic Form, and puts it in a SharePoint list, and it is done. It will then automatically set some default values, and that's its job. It is done, and all it does is wait on the form to be filled in again and put it inside the SharePoint list. Obviously, we have a bunch of other flows that then run and do other things, and these are all automated flows, and they're all watching the exact same SharePoint list, but they all work on different things. Okay, so as you can see here, the step 2 system works off 3 columns. It checks them. These are what we call management columns. All right, so I just prefix them with MGMs. They serve no other purpose apart from to let you know what stage things are at the start and the end of a process, or in between. Okay, so we'll cover those in a second. So they're all just choice fields in a SharePoint list. The second flow looks for those 3, and once those 3 are what we call the blue, blue, yellow system, because that one's blue, and this one's yellow, Then everybody knows it's good to go. It processes the data. And if it's good, it then ends up setting 8 columns, all right, of different choices, which I'll explain in a second. But if it's not, there's a manual bit of the process now, so that the user gets an email from the system that says, you've sent us bad data, send us some good data. The back-end team changed the bad data to good data, and all they then literally do is they go back to the SharePoint line and change the entry to blue, blue, yellow, and it puts it back through the system. There's no going anywhere complicated on this, all right? And once everything's good, it then goes to approvals when there's 8 columns are checked. And if it's good, it goes out for an approval. It waits on an approval response, and then gets approved or rejected or something in between. So this is where it's all key. Management columns in SharePoint lists. So let's explain those. These are very simple choice fields. You always need more than one. 2 is an absolute minimum. Having them color coded is great because it allows people to spot things easier, and always have the default value set for a new line entry. So the default value for that one is new entry, and this one says not tested, which in our world, that makes it blue, that makes it blue, that makes it yellow. And that's the blue, blue, yellow principle we use on this process. So what happens is I then explain all of these things. So step 1 has the management columns, and they stop infinite looping, automatic triggering of something. If you change something in SharePoint and a flow is set to look at the SharePoint list, will it trigger itself again? Management columns stop all of those things. So at the end of step 1, blue, blue, yellow. Step 2 waits on blue, blue, yellow, processes the data, loops through up to 5 times with the child flows, and then sets 8 at the end. And then step 3, it waits on those 8 management columns. And the key here, when using approvals, is do not use start and wait for an approval. Always use start an approval process, then set your management columns, and then wait on a response. And the response will then reset the management columns appropriately to the outcome. All right, so, well, how do we set those? These are all called trigger locks in the flow. They're in the settings section, okay? And the first one is set for these 3 values. That's blue, that's yellow, and those are a big bunch of ones. But they all are done the same way. Now, the question is, how do we actually start the flow off and get those like that? All right, well, you actually create a trigger lock by adding in a temporary step to the flow. It's the filter array system, okay? So you put filter array in, and then where everybody goes wrong is they think, I've got to fill in the from box. The from box you ignore. In pink, you ignore that, okay? So that's what's happening there, all right? So you want to pick your management column. You tell it what you want it is to be equal or not equal, and then you give it the appropriate value here. So this says the management manager is equal to shark. And then when you click advanced view, it goes into edit in basic view. Okay, and that's the value you put into the flow settings. So all you do is you wash, rinse, and repeat for the things. One little catch here on the management status system for choice fields is when you're using the dynamic content, you will get 2 things for a choice field. This is the management status field itself, but that says management status value. That is the actual choice option, and it is that you use to populate these boxes. So that's very important on this setting here. So what's so good about all of this? Well, we can now fix bad data. You can now manually keep repeating the process without having to restart flows. You can change the data and then go blue, blue, yellow in this case and set it going again. Flow errors can occur everywhere, but when you're inside a flow, just put a management column afterwards when you expect something to go wrong, or if you think possibly something's going to go wrong, put a management column in and change its value so you know something's happened and you know where it broke. One real handy case on this is that, and the example we're going to see next, is if you use approvals and the people who are both the person requesting the approval and the people who have been asked to be the approvers, if any of those people are not in a security group that has been applied to the environment the approvals is running out of, the system will fall over and fail. And that's where we first came up with this process, because we couldn't work out why things would fail randomly. And it turned out that it was very easy to catch. So what we did now was we checked for the status that came back, and we set the flows appropriately. Now, that's where this started from. And up until a couple of weeks ago, we never had any other issue with it. But a couple of weeks ago, all our flows, SharePoint's status is also now said approvals issue, other issue. And we didn't know what had happened, but because they all did it, we all knew something else had happened. And there was a fault in the code in Microsoft's approvals app rushed out a couple of weeks ago, and it changed something, and it caused another weird error. But we already had that covered for in the next section, and so that's why it all appeared. So it's a really handy thing to put in just for use cases. So when we have our step for approval, we have a scope block afterwards in red here that says only run if there's an error from the previous step. So this is how we catch it. Step 1 looks for the body, error, and code. So in this case, that's a text field that comes back from the error from approvals. And if it says the user is not a member of the CDS security group, it goes yes. And if it's any other issue, it goes right. And all that happens is that we use a pattern here with its HTTP step, which is the validate update list item step. Okay, and it's very, very easy to get the hang of. And unlike all the other HTTP steps, it requires no headers of any other case. It just requires a JSON body and /items ID of the step you're fixing and validate update list. So what goes in those little boxes? All that happens in these boxes to make this work is that you actually have this bit of text. The field value is the choice text. Whatever you want in the management status, the choice text is now going to say that. The management status column and the choice text is going to say that. All that update new document does is it doesn't add one line to the version history. It keeps it on the same update as previous steps in the same run. Okay, so that's what happens. We don't use the SharePoint GUI step. It's much easier to use the HTTP step with the validate update list item pattern for this, and we use it all over the place. This allows you to end up with a system where that's the process overview, that's your triggers based on the choice fields here, and this is what your system looks like for runs for these two columns, and you know at what stage things are faulty in. Okay, so the last thing on this, going back to this stage, these terminates are all set to succeeded because we've error handled the system. Everything should have gone well. We know what their outputs are for whatever reason, and everything else is on the money for these things. So this pattern here goes behind most things where we think there's going to be a problem, and it allows you to do the list. You can do the same thing in Dataverse as well. Low Code Lewis did a blog on the color lozenges for that, and that is pretty much it for now. Tom Marina showed me how to do the trigger links. Robert Shooten did the validate update list item, and Matthew Devaney will teach you how to write code properly, not the way I've shown you how to do it, and that is that.